So now that I have root access, I don't need to be escalating my privileges. I'm already root. However, like I said, the mission does not stop here. I need to find the database of credit cards and dump the information of the credit cards and move it to my Kali machine. Now, the fact that I don't need to escalate my privileges is all well and good, but I still need to run through the post-exploitation activities that we talked about throughout this course. And one of the first things that I told you we do after post-exploitation is check whether we're running as root or not. This is done. The next thing is I want to find out what other services are running on this machine and what other connections are happening between this machine and other machines, if any. And if you remember, to do that, we use the netstat command. So I'm going to do netstat -antp, and let's look together at the results. Now this looks interesting because as you can see here, there's a MySQL daemon, which is the MySQL server running locally on this machine. There's also an SSH server. And the fact that I say this is interesting is because if you remember when we did the nmap, none of these showed up in the results. So what this tells me is that these services are running locally but are not being accessible remotely over the network. In other words, now that I have access to the machine and I'm on this machine locally as if I'm running on the machine locally, I should be able to get access to these services that are MySQL and SSH. So perhaps it's something to do with the SSH configuration. Let me try and check. Similar to what we've done in the previous sections, I'll use nano to look at the Ssh Config file. However, I immediately get an error that says I cannot open nano here. Is it because the Ssh Config file doesn't exist? That's quite unlikely because the service is running, and I can further verify this by going to the etc/ssh directory and doing ls. And as you can see here, there's a bunch of SSH keys that exist on the system. So SSH is definitely running. However, for some reason, and we'll talk about why in a second, I cannot access the config file, and for another reason, it's not accessible over the network. If you remember in the course, we were able to access SSH over the network, but we were not able to log in as root. So the service, if we do a port scan, will appear to be running. The port will be open. But when we try to log in, we would fail because the config said root was not allowed to log in remotely. However, in this example, the service doesn't even appear to be running remotely when I do an nmap scan, but it appears to be running locally, which re-emphasizes the fact that when we exploit a machine, we need to go through the post-exploitation activity, one of which was running the netstat -antp in this case. So now that we established that the SSH is in fact running, but we're not able to access the config file, I want to figure out why is it that I cannot access the config file. And I'll tell you why. The reason is because this is a non-interactive shell. Nano is an interactive program. When you try to save a change, you get a prompt that says, "Are you sure?" And then you can select the name of the file, and then you hit the Y button, and then you proceed. So Nano is a fairly interactive program. But the shell that we have access to right now is non-interactive. So let's try to convert this to an interactive shell, like we've seen in the previous section. I'll go ahead and look up the reverse shell cheat sheet. And of course, before I use the Python or the PHP, I need to double check whether any of these packages are already installed. And this is where we get to the second bit of our post-exploitation activity. If you remember, I told you when we break into a machine, I would be very interested to find out what packages are running and what versions they are. So let me see if PHP is installed on this machine. I'll do dpackage, which is a command that we've seen before, -l to list the packages, and I'm going to grep for PHP. Unfortunately, it looks like PHP is not installed on this system, unlike the Metasploitable target where we had PHP running. But that does not mean that I should give up, of course not. Let me keep looking and see if there are any other packages that I can take advantage of. If I do dpackage -l, that will of course list all the packages that I have on the system, but that's not the most efficient approach. I want to be doing an educated guess, and I want to look for something that I'm fairly certain will be on this system. And that is going to be Python, because this is a Linux box, and most Linux boxes ship with Python. There's a very good chance that Python will actually be installed on the system. And to verify this, I'll do dpackage -l, and I'll grep for Python. And as you can see here, I get an output that a lot of Python packages actually exist on this system. And I can verify this by typing Python -h, and I'll get the help menu output for Python. So now I know that I can try and use Python to get my interactive reverse shell. Now, you might be wondering, why am I not using Netcat? We've seen how to use Netcat before. It looks pretty straightforward and simple. Why am I not using Netcat? If you've been wondering that, that's a very good question. Let me show you why. Let's do nc-help to see the help output for Netcat. Do you notice anything missing here? Anything that we've seen on the Metasploitable box that we cannot see here? I'm hoping that you noticed that the -e option doesn't exist on this target. So this is a version of Netcat that does not have the -e option. In other words, I cannot use it to execute a program. So I cannot use it to execute the /bin/bash like we've seen on Metasploitable. I am forced now to use something else. So now that I know that Python exists on this machine, I'm going to go ahead and find the Python command to get a reverse shell. I'll copy that, and of course I need to do some editing on it. I need to put what is equivalent to the L host in Metasploit, which is my local host, the IP address of my Kali. The L port or the local port is 1234. I'll leave it as is. And I'm going to change that to /bin/bash. Of course, before I run this, I need to run Netcat on my Kali to be able to catch the shell. So I'm going to do nc-nlvp, listening on port 1234. I'll go back to the target, I'll paste the command, I'll hit enter, I'll go back to my Kali, and here we go. I got a reverse interactive shell. Awesome. If I do ls, I can see the content of the directory. Now let me try to nano the ssh config and see if that's going to work. What do you think? Will I be able to use that? Let's give that a try. I'll do nano the ssh config file, and it looks like I'm getting the same error again. Let me tell you why. Because although this is an interactive shell, we didn't get it through a terminal. When we run something like SSH and connect to a host remotely, we open a terminal, we use SSH to connect to the system, and then we get a shell in that terminal. However, in this case, we managed to break into the target, we managed to get a shell, but that did not happen through a terminal on the target. And this is why when we first started this course, I began by telling you the difference between the terminal and the shell. Yes, it was a very nice historical piece of information, but that was not the sole purpose of it. This is why we need to understand these basics and these fundamentals, because this is what makes all the difference between successfully breaking into a target and failing to break into a target. So now we have an interactive shell. However, we do not have terminal access to it. So it's going to be a little bit difficult for me to change any configuration. I mean, I can use the echo command, but that's going to be a pain in the neck. What I want to try and do now is try to get terminal access, a fully interactive shell in a terminal. But the challenge here is that for me to get that, I need to make sure that the SSH service is accessible remotely. Because as of now, I cannot access the SSH service from my Kali onto the target. So let me see if there's something I can do about this.